All right, let me just start by saying I, 17 am so done with all the drama in my house and I need to vent. I feel like I've been shoved into a situation that I didn't ask for, and it's honestly starting to get unbearable. My dad married my stepmom Claire, mid-40s, 5 years ago, and ever since then, things have been a roller coaster. Except now, the ride's been stuck on a downward spiral, and I'm the one paying for it. It all started when my mom passed away when I was 10. It was just me and my dad after that. Things weren't great, obviously. Losing my mom was the hardest thing I've ever been through, but at least back then, my dad and I had a decent relationship. We leaned on each other. Fast forward a few years, and my dad met Claire, and before I knew it, they were getting married. I tried to be open to the idea, but it became obvious pretty quickly that Claire didn't really care about having a relationship with me. She and my dad had this honeymoon phase, and I was sort of just there, an afterthought. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured, hey, they're adults, maybe they're just doing their thing. But things shifted in a major way when Claire had my half-sister Lila 4 months ago. Suddenly, it wasn't just me being ignored. It was like I was being turned into the default babysitter. Every time Claire had something to do, she'd just expect me to watch Lila, no matter what plans I had. Now don't get me wrong, I love my little sister, but I'm 17, I'm not her parent. Claire seems to think that just because I live in the house, I'm obligated to take care of the baby whenever she doesn't feel like doing it. It's not like I'm asked politely. Claire just tells me, take care of your sister, and that's it. No room for negotiation. So, here's where the real drama kicks in. A few weeks ago, my friends and I planned this run and hangout day because my best friend, James, was visiting from out of town. We hadn't seen each other in over a year, so it was a big deal. I made sure to tell my dad and Claire weeks in advance that I had these plans and wouldn't be available to babysit. They both seemed fine with it, or so I thought. The day of the run rolls around, and just as I'm about to head out the door, Claire blocks me in the hallway. Take care of your sister for a bit. I have to run an important work errand, she said in that tone that made it clear it wasn't a request. I can't. I've got plans with James and the guys. I told you this like a month ago. Well, you don't have a choice. It's my house, my rules, Claire shot back, crossing her arms like she was daring me to argue. I already said no. I've been planning this for weeks, and you knew that, I responded, feeling my frustration boiling over. At that point, I wasn't in the mood to argue, so I just threw on my headphones and walked out. I assumed Claire would take care of Lila, or maybe get my stepbrother Dylan, 20, to help out since he's always home, locked in his room gaming like a hermit. Why couldn't he babysit for once? After all, he's an adult. I went out with my friends and had a great time. Or at least I did, until my phone started blowing up with texts and calls from my dad. I finally picked up, and he was furious. He was going on about how Claire had come home to find Lila crying, starving, and sitting in a diaper that hadn't been changed for hours. Apparently, Claire assumed I'd take over babysitting duties, and when she got home, she found my sister in a complete mess. I was stunned. How was this my fault? I told both Claire and my dad that I had plans. It wasn't my responsibility to double-check that Claire didn't leave the house. She's the parent. When I told my dad that, he just kept repeating that I should have checked before I left. You should have made sure Claire wasn't leaving before you ran off to see your friends, he said, like it was somehow my fault. Now here's where things get real interesting. After my dad's rant, I decided to check the security cameras in our house. We've got a few cameras set up in the living room and hallway, so I figured it'd help clear things up. What I found was shocking. Turns out, I did leave before Claire, but guess who was still at home? Dylan. My 22-year-old stepbrother was there the whole time, just locked in his room gaming. I guess he had his noise-canceling headphones on because he didn't hear Lila crying. When I confronted him later, he acted all nonchalant, saying, "Oh, I didn't know she was crying. I was playing a game." Seriously? How am I the only one getting blamed for this when he was literally sitting in the house the whole time? So I went to my dad and showed him the footage. I explained that Dylan was home the entire time, and if Claire had just asked him to help, none of this would have happened. But instead of backing me up, my dad just doubled down, saying that I should have been responsible enough to check every room in the house before leaving. How does that even make sense? I'm 17. I'm not a parent. I shouldn't have to check that the actual adults in the house are doing their jobs. After all this back and forth, my dad and Claire decided we needed to have a family meeting. I thought this might be the time for them to acknowledge that Claire had dropped the ball, or maybe even for my dad to admit that he was being unfair. But nope. The meeting was just another ambush. Claire started by saying that I needed to step up as the older sibling and be more responsible. She threw in the classic, "You live under our roof, you follow our rules" speech, as if I owed them for existing in the house. She said it's normal for older siblings to help out, and that I should be grateful to have a family that provides for me. Now, here's where I almost lost it. Claire doesn't provide for me. She doesn't pay for my food, my school stuff, or anything else. My dad handles all that, and most of the money comes from my inheritance, which I can't even touch until I'm 18. Claire's acting like I owe her something, but in reality, she's just using me as free labor. I told her straight up, "I'm not the parent here. I don't mind helping out once in a while, but it's not my job to drop everything and babysit whenever you feel like it." She just rolled her eyes and said, "You need to grow up and learn responsibility." At that point, I was fed up. I told them that if this didn't stop, I'd move in with my grandparents. They've always been supportive of me, and I know they wouldn't force me to babysit 24/7. My dad looked panicked when I said that, but Claire just smirked like she didn't believe I'd actually go through with it. After that disaster of a meeting, I decided I needed a break from the chaos at home. I packed a bag and went to stay with my grandparents for a while. They were more than happy to take me in, and it felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Finally, I had some space to breathe. During my time at my grandparents' place, I got a few calls from my dad asking me to come back home. He was trying to patch things up, saying that Claire had good intentions and that we just needed to communicate better. But I wasn't buying it. I told him straight up that I wasn't coming back until they stopped treating me like a free babysitter. Claire didn't reach out at all. She didn't call, text, nothing. It's like she didn't even care that I was gone. That only made me more determined to stay away. A week later, something happened that changed everything. While I was staying with my grandparents, my dad showed up out of the blue. He sat me down and admitted something that left me speechless. "Listen," he said, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "I've been trying to keep the peace between you and Claire, but there's something I haven't told you." I braced myself, not sure what to expect. Claire's been struggling mentally. She's been having a hard time adjusting to life with the baby, and she's been seeing a therapist for postpartum depression. I was shocked. Claire had never mentioned anything about struggling, and my dad had kept it hidden this whole time. Suddenly, some of her behavior started to make sense. Maybe she wasn't just being neglectful. Maybe she was really struggling and didn't know how to ask for help. But here's the thing. Even if Claire was dealing with postpartum depression, it didn't excuse how she'd been treating me. It didn't excuse the constant demands, the guilt trips, or the way she expected me to take on responsibilities that weren't mine. I told my dad as much. "I get that she's going through something," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But that doesn't mean she can treat me like crap. That doesn't mean I should be the one picking up all the slack." My dad nodded slowly, like he finally understood. "You're right. I've been asking too much of you. I'll talk to Claire, and we'll figure something out. But please, come back home. I don't want you to feel like you have to leave your own house." After everything that's happened, I'm still not sure what to do. I've been staying with my grandparents for a few more days, trying to figure things out. Part of me wants to go back home and see if things really will change, but another part of me doesn't trust that they will. Claire's been dealing with her own issues, but that doesn't erase how she's treated me. And honestly, I'm not sure if I want to keep living in a house where I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells. At the end of the day, I love my dad, and I want to have a good relationship with him, but I also need to set boundaries and stand up for myself. I'm not going to let Claire, or anyone else, treat me like I'm less than just because I'm younger.